Why hello there, welcome back everyone. A lot of you may already know this, but I'm quite a big fan of the Evil Dead franchise. And a couple more of you may also know that I have a bit of a hot take about the Evil Dead franchise. And that is that Evil Dead 1 is better than Evil Dead 2. I know, just saying that already probably angered one or two of you, but hear me out, okay? The Evil Dead is a very weird, wacky, funny, creepy, other adjectives film that I've ever seen. And I love it to pieces. The original movie just has so much charm that it's really hard to see this sort of stuff replicated in other 80s slashers. You see, in 1980, a very young and naive Sam Raimi took his friends to a spooky little cabin in the woods to film a horror movie called Evil Dead. The movie premiered in some local film festivals and probably some local small theatres as well, which was a big accomplishment for the kids. I say kids, they were probably about 20, but it's still a big accomplishment considering just how amateur they were essentially. But I guess Stephen King somehow saw it and put in a good word, so alas, we have one of the biggest horror franchises ever. I'm going to assume that you've probably seen some scenes or references to scenes in probably Evil Dead 2 or maybe the first one. The first movie is just so damn good. It's basically my perfect horror comedy. It's genuinely scary at times, has a very distinct style of comedy, where you're not laughing at jokes, but things like line delivery, excessive amounts of blood coming from literally nowhere, the physical performances, the whole lot. I watched this recently with my sister, right? And in about the early third act, the camera decides to just have a meltdown, and there's so much Dutch angles and it can't keep still. And for no reason at all, we just found it completely funny. It's a really cool sequence with genuinely well done horror, but it's also just so damn funny and I have no idea why. It's really hard to describe the humor of this movie, you kind of just need to watch it. Some people just don't find it funny, which, fair enough, comedy is subjective. But this is sorta kinda my style of comedy. Rarely ever does a comedy horror manage to actually feel scary and funny at the same time in the same scene. I've only found a couple of movies to do that. The Evil Dead has a really simple plot, but it gets done what it wants to do. A couple of friends go to a cabin to spend a few nights. While they're there in the basement, they find a book bound with human skin and written with blood. Ah yes, the Edgelord book. They also find a tape player with audio recordings of someone reading the book. And I also personally noticed that not only were the owners of the cabin collectors of satanic memorabilia, they also appear to be pretty big fans of the Hills Have Eyes based on that poster. I have no idea why Sam Raimi decided to decorate this spooky underground basement with a Hills Have Eyes poster, but I love it either way, so whatever. So they play the tape of someone reading the book, which summons demons called Deadites, who possess the characters. Ash, the protagonist, played by Bruce Campbell, must fight them off. And the only way to kill them is through bodily dismemberment. The sound design of the Deadites are really fucking cool also. The strangely compressed laughing paired with the grainy camera gives this movie a really unique aesthetic. That's sort of Grindhouse, but also not one that you really see in other Grindhouse movies. I guess maybe it's sort of similar to Dawn of the Dead, but still it somehow manages to feel really unique. And the entire third act is one of the craziest things ever. It's deliciously corny and over the top, as well as just being genuinely well made. So many iconic shots like the light bulb filling with blood, or the Deadites melting away and turning into mushy peas. The effects here aren't necessarily realistic, but they still look charming and cool. So, let's go on to why I'm an idiot. So Evil Dead 2 is the thing, and most people say that Evil Dead 2 is better than the first movie in almost every way. Not me, apparently. Listen, when I went into this movie, I guess maybe my expectations were too high. I don't know. Maybe I'm just an idiot. I don't know. But just hear me out, okay? I like Evil Dead 2. It's a fun movie. I have fun watching it. But listen, I've tried so many times just to resonate with it as much as other people do, but I just can't. And I'm gonna give my personal reasons why I personally prefer the first movie. Please don't get angry. Point number one, this movie tries too hard to be corny. So with the first movie, the humour is definitely intended at parts, but the corny humour is mixed with some genuinely really well done horror. I think the first one can be pretty scary at times. And yes, Evil Dead 2 is definitely a much more of a comedy, I get that. I just personally prefer the horror side of the first one. It's just a preference. But also, I don't really find Evil Dead 2 as funny. I mean, yeah, this definitely isn't a jokey movie, like, it's definitely trying at least to replicate the same humour as the original, but me personally, it just doesn't feel the same. It's not as on the nose as Army of Darkness, but, you know, just, it's not as funny, I don't know. I think I just preferred the more subtle side of the first movie. Point number 2, the other characters blow. Okay, so even I can admit that Ash in the second movie is quite a bit better than his debut. He's very fun in this movie, he's the best thing about it, I can agree with you on that one. But you see, in Evil Dead 1, I quite like the other characters. I think Cheryl had some fun and interesting moments. I think Linda had a great chemistry with Ash. Scotty was a pretty fun side character who actually had some genuinely interesting conflict a little bit, albeit it didn't really affect the story all too much, but it was interesting either way, I think. And I can't give you the names of any other characters apart from Ash in Evil Dead 2. I don't think they were nearly as fleshed out. I just really wasn't interested in them. Point number 3, give me a goddamn break from the craziness. So one of the best things about Evil Dead 1 is just how batshit insane the ending was. All of a sudden it goes from 0 to 100, it's just crazy, the camera's doing all sorts, there's blood everywhere, all Ash's friends are demons with jaws falling off, it's horrifying and hilarious. And I feel like with Evil Dead 2, Sam Raimi was like, oh yeah, people liked that was the best thing. So we're just gonna make the whole movie that. Which I guess works for some people, but me personally, I kind of preferred a bit of a build-up to it. In Evil Dead 2, we get this little recap at the start of basically retelling the events of Evil Dead 1, but cutting out the other characters apart from Ash and Linda, and it lasts about 15 to 20 minutes. And from then on, the movie's just insane, apart from the other characters joining. And I'm sorry, but I think the craziness is just less fun when it's the whole movie. As Syndrome from The Incredibles said, and when everyone's super, no one will be. When everything's corny, nothing is. I'm not saying this is soulless, far from it. It's actually quite funny. There's some good laughs here and there. I just think so much of this movie was dedicated to making it crazy, or the fact that it just doesn't feel crazy anymore. And yeah, I guess with comedies, consistency is key, but like I said, I kind of preferred the horror side of the original rather than the comedy side of this. Part number 4. This movie is ambitious. The effects were great, obviously, for the time and the budget. And obviously they put more stuff into Evil Dead 2, so you gotta have more crazy effects to do. But the effects just don't look as good as the first movie. Yes, I know they couldn't have had a Tim Burton looking dancing Linda in the first movie because they just physically couldn't. But obviously in 2 they physically could. But this also kind of dates this movie just because it doesn't look great. Again, I'm sure it did for the time and budget, but just the cracks do show a lot more in 2 than 1, which, you know, is kind of a bad sign for a sequel. I'm sure in a movie theatre in 1987 it probably looked a lot better than this, but at that point I started to just think, this movie came out in the same year as Hellraiser, and had about 3 times the budget, and Hellraiser looks incredible. And so there we have it, that's pretty much all I have to say. Once again, I respect everyone's opinions. I don't necessarily think my opinion is the be-all end-all. I'm not a critic, I'm just a loser. And if you want my opinions on the other Evil Dead movies, Army of Darkness is decent, the remake is not great, Ash vs Evil Dead is pretty sick, Evil Dead Rise might not be great.